Hello, everybody. Welcome back to One Leeds Fan Channel. Hope you're doing fantastically well. It is Connor here. Fantastically well. Maybe I'm stretching it a little bit there, but we're back with a new series that we're going to be starting on the channel, probably every Sunday, depending on Leeds United games, called 5 Things That We Learn About the game that Leeds United have played. So, yeah, we've all obviously come down a little bit. If you haven't checked out the review of the game yesterday, please go check it out. Some great feedback from you guys. And what I'm going to try and make this 5 things about is your feedback on the review video as well. I want to know exactly what you think, and I'm going to try and incorporate that into 5 things so we can have a real discussion. So, number 1, I think it's the obvious one, isn't it? Calvin Phillips out is absolutely huge, but I think there's also another problem. When Llorente's out, we saw a huge problem yesterday, and we'll get onto the number 2 point as well, which was why that was problematic. But Calvin Phillips out of this Leeds United side is absolutely massive. And there's so many different compartments. That's the fact that we've got a small squad. It's the fact that he does such a specialised role that a centre-back can't do in that central midfield role because they're used to seeing the entire pitch in front of them. Calvin's very mobile. He's able to get to the left, to the right, get the ball out of his feet, one-touch passing. He's an extremely good footballer, and you saw that in the Euros. And listen, we can't be that team who is so reliant on him, but we are because of the sort of depth of the squad. Because the squad is so small, Calvin Phillips, the over reliance on him and players like Llorente is absolutely huge. But the problem is, it's the reinforcements in that role. And I think every single Leeds United fan would turn around and say when they saw the lineup yesterday, they were very, very disheartened. I was very, very pessimistic when it came to lineup yesterday. I just didn't see where the victory was going to come from, to be honest with you. So, listen, he's absolutely huge, and there is a huge sort of, as I've said, an over-reliance on him, and I would like that to change in the transfer window, to be honest with you. So, but what else did we see as well? We saw Llorente, didn't we? Llorente not being in the starting 11 causes some real problems as well. We're defensively solid towards the back end of last year, and him and Calvin out of that back sort of 6 is huge. And you saw that yesterday. It was so easy for Manchester United to bypass, get into our box. The amount of times they actually got into Leeds United's box, without even getting any shots away, but just being in that box, and how deep Leeds United were was actually quite frightening. It was backed up by sort of a heat map. And it was all just in Leeds' area, and the lack of touches for our forward players, the amount of touches for their forward players really did signify that. And the sort of authority that Llorente seems to bring, the classiness, the passing out from the back, the zipped passes, the really fierce zipped passes into the midfield, which enable Leeds to progress without sort of question. If Llorente's getting the ball, he's always going to go forward. He's very, very good at breaking the lines and sort of advancing and bringing the sort of defence into the midfield transition. Very, very good at that. He's always looking forward, rarely looks side to side, which is always great with Llorente. And I felt yesterday it was very, very side to side as maybe our central defensive midfielder wasn't showing for the ball, and maybe our centre-backs weren't confident enough to break that line and break through the midfield. And you saw that yesterday for me. As well, just tying into that point, there was also a real reliance, and I do think this a little bit at this moment in time. This is where the winger chat comes in. There's a huge reliance on Rafinha. If Rafinha doesn't produce something special in the attacking third, I think Leeds really, really struggled to produce any offensive sort of output. And that was signified yesterday. So to the back end of last season when Leeds won, 7 games in 10, that Rafinha was absolutely 8, 9 out of 10 most games. And he was involved in so many goals. There were statistics last season about his goal involvements in 6 months, which was staggering. There needs to be someone once again else who can, if the burden is too heavy on Rafinha and he's having an off game like he was yesterday, there needs to be someone who steps up and does what Rafinha does, which is take the game by the scruff of the neck, help Patrick Bamford out, and in turn help Jack Harrison out. And we didn't have that yesterday. And I thought that there is quite an over reliance on Rafinha's quality in that sort of attacking third, and we need more. And that sort of brings me on to a later point as well. But the second point is sort of 2 left-footed centre-backs. I know Bielsa's not sure on this, and I don't think this would be his choice. I actually thought that you were going to get Robin as the centre-back yesterday, and obviously we're going to get Calvin Phillips in that central defensive midfield role, which didn't happen. And then we'd have had a right and left footer. What 2 left footers naturally do is, and you saw this really with Pascal the other day, obviously because he was occupying the right-hand side of the centre-backs, consistently, because he has to narrow his body and his body's closed, he's consistently going to Luke Ayling. The ball comes to him. He's a left-footed player, so he naturally veers over to the right-hand side, which is Luke Ayling. And you saw that consistently. Pascal was barely going forward with the ball at his feet. He was barely passing through the lines. It was always to Luke Ayling. And then you'd maybe get a Paul Pogba pressing really, really high on Luke Ayling, which eventually meant that Luke Ayling would lose the ball. Manchester United would recover possession. The high press killed us yesterday. It absolutely killed us. But there was also a real, in elements, I thought, a little bit of fear with Leeds. Maybe our centre-backs carrying the ball when Leeds were in tricky situations and going into that midfield transition and opening the game up a little bit and beating the press. But not enough of that was happening. It was very sideways when it went to our two centre-backs, and it became predictable. Man United started deploying the press higher and higher out wide, which is backed up once again by the heat map that was produced yesterday. And the two left-footed centre-back thing, I can't stand it. It's one of those things with the right-footed left-back as well. I've always said it with Stuart Dallas. I absolutely love Stu, and he's done a great job at left-back, and he's overperformed, but I prefer Stuart Dallas in that central midfield because I want an out-and-out natural left-footer there so he can open his body up and Leeds have width. Now, when you've naturally got two left-footers, they're always going to veer to that right-hand side when they're on that right-hand side of the centre-back. So I think Leeds were narrowed, and Pascal Strout was looking for Luke Ayling consistently, which made Leeds very, very predictable. And obviously, as I've said at the start, with the lack of showing from the central defensive midfielder, it was always a problem. And Luke Ayling, I thought, struggled yesterday as well. Point number 3, I think we all know this, and we've mentioned it. Transfers, for me, they need to happen, and that sort of reverts back to the depth yesterday. Tyler Roberts, I don't mind Roberts, but as an impact sub who's going to completely change the game, I don't feel that is an option in that central midfield role. As a wing option as well, we were looking at Helder Costa there, and we have so much reliance at this moment in time on potentially Somerville being great, because our depth options off the bench are never going to affect a game. That's the cold hard truth about it. Helder Costa is never, for me, he's never going to come on anymore and affect a Leeds United game, and turn a game. I think that's just I don't know whether or not Leeds are trying to put him in the shop window, which would be a smart move, but it's sort of affecting Leeds and affecting other players' development. If likes of Somerville are not going to start because Leeds are trying to put Costa in the shop window, I think he's the more likely to go out in the transfer window. But for me, I think Helder Costa seems like a lovely guy, but as a footballer, at this moment in time, I think he's hit his ceiling with Leeds. I think he's hit his ceiling with the Premier League. You saw that with Wolves and obviously consequently with Leeds United. And I think that's a big problem, and Leeds have to fix that, because as I've said at the start, the reliance on Rafinha quality is way too much and way too much pressure, that he needs help. And he does have that with Harrison, but just that X factor, that element of quality where Leeds can look to and think there's going to be a bit of creativity here. And if Rafinha is off it, there needs to be help there. And I feel like the transfer window is absolutely huge in getting a central midfielder in, so there's not an over-reliance on these two players, which is at this moment in time for me, Calvin Phillips and Rafinha. There has to be more. Even if they're not even if they're not starting, there has to be more quality within these ranks. I'm seeing even Premier League sides who have just come up, the Championship sides who have just come up, who have quality off the bench. They still have quality off the bench. I look at Leeds' bench and I think it's not really there in an attacking capacity. And I think, as I've just said, we've hit the glass ceiling with a lot of our players. And just to tie into that as well, the Rodrigo Click defensive partnership is always going to be a problem, I think, especially against these top 6 sides, because I think the defensive awareness is a partnership. There's something clearly wrong there. There's a breakdown between those two. Against the top 6 sides, it's really evident. But I think, defensively, we saw it against Southampton at the back end of last year, when defensively they were just sort of all over the place. Leeds obviously got the victory, but the midfield, I thought Southampton won that midfield, and I'm contradicting myself because I always say if you win the midfield battle, you win the game. But I actually thought, Leeds' clinical finishing obviously won the game for us. But I feel overall, Rodrigo and Click as a defensive partnership are poor together. They are very poor together in terms of an understanding between each other, whether or not they, don't have that cohesion or they don't understand what they're doing. I think Click does, obviously, but from a defensive capacity, once again, we saw exactly what happened in the first game. We saw Fred running off Rodrigo. We saw McTominay running absolutely everywhere and not being picked up, by obviously Rodrigo or Click, who was supposed to be picking either Fred or McTominay up. And then obviously you saw Bruno Fernandes having the freedom of Old Trafford to sort of destroy Leeds yesterday because Robin didn't follow him. So overall, the midfield, we were absolutely taken apart. And Rodrigo and Click as a partnership, I think that needs looking at really, especially against these top teams, because defensively we're just not aware. And the amount of times that they broke through that midfield, I mean, even it didn't always result in positive play from them as well. Shot on goal, a narrow miss. It was just the amount of times they were able to get the ball and drive through the middle, and it didn't come to anything. But it's just the fact they had so much space, and that's because half the time Rodrigo was, only about 2 or 3 yards behind Patrick Bamford. Click wasn't able to keep up with Fred or McTominay, or whoever his man was. I believe it was Fred. But Leeds just struggled in that department, and whether or not there's going to be someone like Lewis Bate who's going to come up and start sort of demanding that position and competing or whatever, or whether or not we rotate Roberts in there. And this is the whole question mark. There's an over reliance on KP, and we need another body in there for me. But then you look a little bit further forward, and I think Leeds are going to persist with this, of course. But I would just have liked Rodrigo and Click to develop more of an understanding with each other. And I think in pre-season, you saw it still. Against Villarreal, for me, you still saw the breakdown there. And once again, yesterday, you still saw the breakdown there. And Stuart Dallas does help that out for me massively. So that's why we need Junior Firpo starting most games. I think that's going to be a positive for Leeds United. But Rodrigo and Click as a midfield partnership, I wouldn't ever use that midfield partnership ever again. I think it's just going forward, it's good, but that's not what a midfield's about. It's about defending, it's about mediating, it's about attacking. It's everything comprised into one as a complete midfielder. And in this system, a man marking system, you simply have to do your defensive duties. And I feel they try, but I just don't get their relationship in there. So I think that's my point number 3. The style of play as well, it was interesting towards the back end of last year, because Leeds' style of play was really adapted when we played Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, Man City, obviously down at the Etihad. It was adapted into a more defensive style of play. And I think Bielsa did that. He learned from the first game. Leeds adapted and were brilliant. And listen, they weren't the most entertaining games. We beat Tottenham Hotspur, where we seemed to really go for the jugular. And Bielsa sort of modified the game plan a little bit for Tottenham, I feel, at home. But with Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, Man City, there was an obvious change in style and how we play, and we're very, very successful. Now, a lot of Leeds fans won't like that because they want to see total football. But I think you still you go toe to toe, gung-ho against these sides, the top 6 sides, and don't adapt your style of play like we did at the latter half of last season when we saw so much success. We're just going to get picked off. If we go into that game, let's say we play Chelsea away or whatever, with the same style of football that we went into that Man United game, there could be a big problem. And for just, I want to say, I'm not asking Bielsa, and I'm not saying at all here as just a little caveat, Leeds needs to change the style of play, but we adapted in the second half of last season to play the top teams in a certain way. I don't think we had that yesterday. I think it was the old approach of when we went to Old Trafford last time, where it was gung-ho. It was just attack versus attack, and we're always going to struggle against the top sides with phenomenal talent when we go attack for attack, and we don't have that defensive capacity in midfield. So for me, the style of play against these top sides has got to be adapted, and we saw that towards the back end of last season as evidence. And point 5, guys, it's hard to take, but they were just very good. A lot of us are talking about Leeds mistakes and this, that, and the other, and there were a lot of concentration wasn't there. You break down all the goals, and there wasn't really moments of quality. It was losing men. It was a breakdown in focus. It was poor balls out from the back, which were intercepted, and then they broke on us. A lot of those that trio was in Leeds' failures yesterday. We sort of were our own worst enemies, which is, what we all said for large parts of last season, but we adapted, which was brilliant. But they were very good. They were very, very good yesterday. Bruno Fernandes was phenomenal. That could be his performance of the season. Obviously, Scott McTominay Zidane just has game after game against us, which seems to be good. And Pogba was outstanding, 4 assists. I think he got 3 assists in the entire of last season. So there you go. Bruno Fernandes, I think he's got 48 goal involvements in 56 games. So they're a world-class side, and they still had so many players out as well. Well, players out who would normally start in that 11. So it's not to be downhearted about. I continuously keep saying this. It's not to be downhearted about the result. I think Man United are going to take a few scalps this year, but it seemed to be very easy for them yesterday. Too easy for me. And that's the big difference. In a game of this magnitude, where it means so much to us and so much to them, which it does, we need to be putting in better performances for our own principles and our own, how the standards that we set, and the Bielsa standards. A lot of people are saying, it was Man U, but it was the basics from Leeds. We caused a lot of their goals, not because of their pressure or whatever, but it was individual mistakes, concentration, as I've said, focus. So That's our standards that we set for ourselves, that we set at the end of last season when we won 7 out of 10 games, that we set for ourselves, well, where from the 23rd of February, we were second in the form table till the end of the season. They're our standards. So we have to uphold those standards. And those standards were not met yesterday. And I think holistically, in general, we can't be so over reliant on players to if Rafinha gets an injury this year, or if Calvin is out for an extended time period, there has to be a solution to that. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, guys. I've been going on for 15 minutes now. Make sure you watched the review yesterday. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Are there any other points that you felt that we should have touched on? I hope you've enjoyed this video. And as I said, like, comment, subscribe, guys. I will catch you in a bit. Cheers.